A very good evening and a warm welcome to you from Pakhuis de Zwijger. Welcome to another episode of Designing Cities for All. That, of course, is our 2-year-long research and activity program in which we take a deep dive into designing products, places and systems for all. Today's program, we will discuss Satyendra Pakhale's new book, Culture of Creation. Satyendra Pakhale is a multifaceted designer who stands at the crossroads of the design currents, shaping contemporary design that goes from industrial design, digital projects and mobility to architecture. Pakhale, who's also known as a polymath designer with dazzling dexterity, that's a perfect example, was trained both in India and Switzerland. His design work is an act of unity going beyond any binaries such as high and low tech, industrial production and traditional craft, functionality and poetic significance. Pakhale explores diverse cultural roots and creates contemporary objects and architectural spaces with the awareness that being a designer means being socially and culturally responsible. If you'd like to join in our conversation, that is possible through your device. That is, if you go to menti.com, you will ask for a code. And if you have that code, which is 33722031, 33722031. If you use that code, you can log into that screen and ask questions here, if possible. So I hope the code will appear on screen as well, so you have a bit more time in order to join. There it is. And in the meantime, I would like to introduce our main guest. Satyendra, a warm welcome to you. Very happy that you're here. Well, this is what you've been working on. That is quite a hefty book we have here. Very, very interesting with many ideas, also a lot of projects. And what you said before we started this program, tonight it's not going to be only about projects. Why not?
The obvious reason is obviously the design monograph has always been about projects. And of course, projects are interesting to talk about. And that's my, let's say, biggest fascination, curiosity, even a passion. But I think above all the projects, I think what is necessary and very much appropriate for the platform we are sitting in right now is to talk about ideas and the ideas which are larger than a project and hopefully resonate with big audience rather than just specifically just talk about design and architecture.
Right. You know? So the ideas are central tonight as well. To start with the title, you've called the book The Culture of Creation. And why is that?
Culture of creation is really a practice, what we call. It's a very wide encompassing idea of a practice. It's really rooted in a primary notion and a very innate. Let's say the primary impulse of a human being is to create, to make, to build. To cultivate, to make something, you know, and that being our studio practice, you know. So the idea is to create something, to cultivate ideas, and culmination of those ideas are kind of empowered into a framework that is generates value, which puts the things in a context, a meaning, and then also the purpose of those ideas and eventually the practice.
Right.
And that synthesis of all of those things we call a culture of creation.
Okay. We will talk about that more in depth.
Yeah.
But to start with the beginnings, why did you decide to write a monograph or this book?
Well, I mean, this is a very important question in that sense because when I was doing work early on, intuitively creating works, and there was a strong polarity between people who are almost progressive thinkers, the people who are on a cutting edge, almost one could call avant-garde in some sense, across the world, and they supported it, and there was a big kind of another polarity, they didn't get it, so they call all kind of names to it. And over a period of time, I continued to do that. It was not easy ride to steer through these things, and that's a huge, let's say, intellectual pressure in terms of, because it's always, there is a unspoken, let's say, context that they expect you to follow certain norm. The moment you create another language, another possibility which has another connotations, it becomes extremely difficult for people to comprehend. And if it doesn't follow in that kind of their understanding, it becomes whatever. All kind of stupid names come on your way, from ethnic to whatnot. And over a period of time, it becomes very essential to clarify those ideas and show the roots of those ideas. And therefore, a necessity to put those ideas in a context and not put the ideas in a narrow context of the project, but understand them in a much broader sense. And that's where the project started. And that's where the idea of a book.
And what helps to put the project in a much broader sense is the contribution of several people you asked to write in the book.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to do that, and how did you make that selection?
Well, I mean, the selection is not the thing, because there has been let's say, intellectual curiosity all along in the practice. It's never been, with that comes a dialogue with very many people, and some of the colleagues are here as well in the audience. And that intellectual curiosity led to this conversation over many, many years, for last 3 decades, I could say. And most of the people who are contributing in the book, they happen to know me so very well, actually, that it's a very innate, let's say, accurate, I would say, and more critical perspective. It's not just writing for the sake of writing. And I'm very happy and humbled that they took time to put effort and go to the points and the issues we are talking about. So the selection of the people was not an issue at all, because they are part of me for a very long time. The more I'm more happy and humbled by the fact that they took time and they went to a specific core of that issue and went really deep. It's not a superficial writing. It goes much deeper.
I've got an example of that, and that's by the curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Mrs. Paola Antonelli. And she states in the introduction essay of the book, Satyendra Pakhale, as the name, appearance, and some of the products testify, is Indian. Yet he is not your romantic idea of an quote-unquote Indian designer. Can you elaborate on this statement?
Well, I don't know. Should ask Paula about that, but what can I say? I think there is always this very cliche idea of I remember this notion people put, because they have this kind of fixed idea of who you are. So you get subscribe or ascribe to your kind of a background, and therefore that becomes your own identity. I always defy those possibilities, because that limits what one could become, what one can do. It does not take into account your ingenuity, your creativity, your possibility, your innovation. It does not.
Would you define yourself as an Indian designer?
I would define myself as a human being, first of all. Yeah. I don't want to go
But still, that quote is in the book. So why did you put it in the book if it's not who you exactly are?
No, it's not quote in the book. That's how the world perceives you in a very limited manner. They don't see you from a different. That's what I think she is referring to.
So the pigeonhole is something that you're opposed to, and that you want to break that system of pigeonholing is something
There's
that
no
you would like
doubt
to break.
I'm Indian. That's not something one has to profess or one has to put a big label on. That's just the fact. It doesn't have to be proud or ashamed of. There's nothing. That is not a conversation.
Right.
And should not be.
But for people, it is. I mean,
and that's where we have to go beyond that, and that's the intention.
I understand that. We talked a little bit about the culture of creation, and it's also what I think is interesting about that title and the term as well is how would you define culture? What is culture to you?
Culture is many things. Culture is dynamic, it's living, it's a life right now, actually. For me, culture is not a dead thing. It's what we cultivate right now, what we define, redefine, make happen right now. In that sense, in a very plural sense, culture means lots of things, actually. There is an industrial culture, there's a personal culture. There are many, many facets of that. So it's not one. And within that, what we are talking here is specifically about a practice. And that practice we call culture of creation, almost as against culture of consumption, if I could say that. And that the innate necessity to create, I think, and that is the culture I'm talking about here.
Right. How would you recognize or define culture? Because we see several groups in society. You recognize culture, sometimes by ethnicity, and we would like to go beyond that. But how do you recognize culture?
I think there are multiple cultures, and one would not give one definition of cultures. Within just the conversation we had before we start talking right now here, is that there could be many possibilities of culture, even new possibilities, and an individual can hold or practice or consist of multiple layers of different cultures. So it's not just one predefined notion.
Yeah.
And I think the trouble happens because predefined notion, and people define that for you. Therefore, I said right in the beginning of my practice, if I can repeat that, is I would not like to become victim of somebody else's ignorance.
Wow, you have to elaborate on that. Because when does that happen? And
it
how
happens when people have their limited ideas and they impose that idea and they look through that limited perspective towards you.
Yeah, but still, it's difficult to go beyond that because what you are talking about are biases and stereotypes.
Yes.
And they are deeply rooted sometimes in people's minds, but also in culture and in systems that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
We see several examples.
Yeah.
And how do you get that? How do you break that bias? Because in your mind, the definition doesn't apply, but it's still deeply rooted in people and in systems. How do you manage that?
Yeah, there's no one easy answer on that. On primary level is you reject it, first of all. If anybody labels you that, you reject it, first of all. Second is one could only talk through examples. Example is a work at the end. Example is the body of work where you see a possibility and your ideas manifested in a very different ways. Not in one narrow perspective or materiality or technology or a possibility, but it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
And once within, let's say, in a given profession, we're talking here design, if people have that kind of a narrow perspective to define you, if they have seen a ceramic work, they romanticize and put you in that context. The moment you talk about that ceramic is aerospace ceramic, which requires thousands of degrees of temperature, lots of technology to control, then they get kind of baffled. They don't know where to place you. So the question is, there are these multiple things, these are the notions. And what I mean by somebody else's ignorance is that their limitation of looking at you.
Yeah.
So as a creator, it's my responsibility to defy that, and create new possibility to show through examples.
And not be a victim in that sense.
Exactly.
But still, then you still have to be in a position of privilege, actually, in order to prove somebody wrong. And what can you do? Is there another way if you're not in that position of privilege?
I think this is a very important point you say, the position of privilege. And there is no simple answer on that. And I would just simply say that you define yourself that you are in a position of privilege. You define that your opinion count because you take your work serious. You define that you don't allow anybody to put you down. You define that you don't allow anybody to pigeonhole you or define you from their narrow perspective. I had to do that all along.
I can imagine, and I agree with you, but still I will play devil's advocate because that's my role tonight. Maybe you can define it, but if it lands on deaf ears, if it lands on systems that are very, 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 very stern, how long can you be, agile enough or resilient enough in order to try to redefine yourself? And if you, walk into walls and you can't get any further, what do you do then?
I think this is always a question, and that question applies to many things as such. But I've been doing that all along. Now there is a 25 years of practice, and I still have to do that sometimes. But if you dig a history and you find out, you see somebody like Constantin Brancusi, Brancusi we call him, came from Romania, walked to Paris. That time he was discriminated. For him, he was somebody outside. He was not particularly welcome in all the gatherings, what was happening when he was living in Paris. Today, he's a national hero, his studio is celebrated, and so on and so forth. There are other examples like that, which are living example where people define. And I think there is no simple answer on that, and probably the young folks who are listening to our conversation, and I would say you just have to stick to your guns. I mean, that's the only thing. There is when and how, and there are no one formula. You have to be convinced of your own convictions and possibilities and continue to do that. I think that's the only way. There is no other way, because when you start, you have no privilege. No. That's just the fact.
Yeah, true. And it takes a long time in order to get that position, but it's still hopefully attainable for especially the young people that are listening. Creation, as we are on the road of definition, where you already described, the definition that you give tonight is subjective. There's not only one definition of the terms that we use, but the culture of creation, can you elaborate on the creation? What the key element there?
Yeah, actually, I mean, creation is in a no sense playing with the word of sense of, because creation is used in a very orthodox, conservative, religious setting, is nothing, no reference to that. I think creation in a pure sense of genuinely to create something, engage with making something, in that very primary sense, actually, of creation is taken. And it's also the word, in a sense, we live around the world, and there's no place on a planet one could think about that the culture of consumption is so much pushed on us. So the value of creation is predominantly very, very essential at this point of time, the value of creation, and therefore that culture of creation as a practice is very, very important. Yeah.
What's the connection between consumption and creation?
Well, there are. I mean, that's a topic and talk in itself. That's I think the way that the consumption is pushed on us is one thing, which is completely different thing. Creation it's really innate, let's say, respect for things what you have. Once you're involved or curious or interested or informed about creation, you will not throw away things. You will have a different value for things, And the consumption is to use and throw. I mean, that's a completely opposite of creation. Yeah.
Is it a global phenomenon to be consuming as much as we do? Or is there a human innate need for consumption, do you think?
I would say it's a created possibility. That was not the reality 60, 70 years ago, anywhere on the planet. It's a created, it's a designed act. So today's trouble we have is, I always talk about it, is a design act. It happened, you go to Albertine, you go to Jumbo, any kind of supermarket, the fruit which does not have to be packed in a plastic are packed in a plastic, in a plastic wrap. I mean, that's kind of stupidity.
That's very interesting what you say, because is it as simple as just redesigning our system?
No, I would not say that. I'm not saying that. Yeah.
I'm saying that, but because if the need is being designed, it could be redesigned as well.
That's for sure. I mean, one could design our way out, but I would not say the things are that simple, because we created so many complex intertwined systems that we really need to ask very primary questions to solve those things. Yeah. We'll not be able to solve that by just taking away some packaging.
How do you start that process of redesigning, in your opinion?
I would not even call redesigning to begin with. I will call questioning primary things, actually, because unless we ask the primary questions, we'll never solve anything. There will be superficial changes, And I always criticize, I mean, we so religiously separate all the trash, which is necessary, but it's limiting. That's not the only solution.
And it should be more integral, and the solution should be more integral as well. Because the reason I ask that question is that in designing Cities for All programs, we do ask the question of redesigning and designing for who, and having more inclusive designs. And what you often hear is that you need to start with education on every level. Yeah. Is that a solution for you as well? Because you've been involved in education, and of course you've been educated yourself. Those systems, are those to be redesigned or reevaluated?
Yeah, of course. Awareness is a primary necessity for any change. I mean, awareness has to be there. If there's no awareness, there's no possibility. So people have to know, So that education is primary. There's no question about that, any issue for that matter. But the question is, it does not stop there. I think the complexity of our issue is so high that the policymakers, I mean, all of us have to be integral part of that change. Otherwise, it will never happen.
Right. Yeah. Right. There's another quote I would like to reference to as well, because one of the contributing authors, Jacques Barsac, states, Pakhale cultivates ideas and critical thinking about what he calls social modernity. These are rooted not only in his knowledge of history, but also in his own life experiences. So tell us about social modernity in your life experiences.
It's a big question, but I think social modernity is because there has been, let me start somewhere else, there has been a declaration by many creators, architects, designers, that the project of modernity has finished, is done. And I think that's a very limited view of the world. The project of modernity is not finished. It's not even done, because if you look around the society, especially societies which are vertical, and to smaller or lesser extents, different societies are to great extent vertical.
What are vertical societies?
Vertical societies means hierarchical societies, societies which are not in a true sense democratic. And I don't mean democracy here in a sense of electoral machinery, political machinery. I'm talking democracy in a sense of, in a pure sense, a social meaning, having social democratic value as a mindset of every individual in a society. And I think to lesser or let's say far extent, we have different kind of conditions. The country I come from, which has far less actually. In Netherlands, yes, and in here there is much more awareness, but still it's not complete. On the other hand, the representation of that in a built environment, that is from object to urban level, it has also that lack of that representation, that plurality, that possibility, that inclusiveness, or that cohesion in that true sense, has not been done yet.
No.
That's a big body of work yet to happen.
No. Who's responsible for that?
I think it's very easy and very obvious and tempting to point fingers, but I would not do that. And I think it's the lack of awareness. There always been certain singular way things are made and built, and the complete context of plurality is never taken into account, actually.
No, I do understand that, but without pointing fingers, somebody has. It's easy for somebody to take the lead. It's easy to pave the way, and if you break systems, it's not. You can just throw it up in the air, but still, in a concrete sense, how do we go about it? How do we go about that questioning, redefining, and who should be there in order to be a stakeholder?
I think, first of all, let me correct you. I don't mean to break down the system and create a chaos or anarchy. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking, project by project, object by object. One could ask those questions and recreate the possibilities. And every generation must do that, actually. And that is, I think, the general overall awareness. I think that is what is going to bring a change. Otherwise, we'll create a chaos, So
is breaking systems always, is the result of breaking a system always creating chaos?
It could lead to all kinds of things. The possibility is to create a societal positive change. And if to do that, one needs to create possibilities through examples.
Again, that's societal possible change, which I'm very interested in, and I think a lot of people are. What kind of people, what kind of groups, what kind of movements do you need in order to get that about?
That's an interesting question. I think that there's all of it, all kind of possible, let's say, the people who are on a board, actually, policymakers to makers to creators to ordinary citizens. I think everybody involved, actually.
Yeah, but again, if it was a possibility, it should happen. Again, devil's advocate. If you think that policymakers that are now in power will do that, that's an illusion, because they're very much intertwined in the existing systems and they benefit from that systems that there is. So if you have the high hopes that they will change something, then that's not going to happen.
That's a very good question. What you say that's not going to happen, that we know. What I'm saying is, an ideal situation, that should be the case. If that is not the case, the change or the initiative can come from any source. In ideal situation, that should be the objective. But do you want to make a march and change, or do you want to create example and change? There are many possibilities. Not one. So, and I think all are valid possibilities, unless we don't get into violence. But other possibilities are there. Creative, engaging possibilities are there.
Right. There are no questions yet from the audience, so I'd like to ask people. If you would like to ask questions, that is possible if you go to menti.com, and there you will be asked for a code which appears here on the screen. That is 33722031. If you apply that code, you can ask questions here. We've been talking about social modernity, and how is that entangled in your work, and how is that important for you?
Yeah, these are very primary questions, actually, of social modernity. One of the examples I would like to bring in, actually, there are a couple of slides here. Jonathan, maybe you can bring in the slide of this example. This is really, if you look around the world, and especially here, even if you take in the city of Amsterdam or any, let's say, contemporary apartment, the kitchen is a part of the living room, and this was not the case. And this is an innovation of an architect, a lady, Charlotte Perrier, who actually was working in Le Corbusier's team, and she was the one who came with the idea because traditionally the kitchen was always at the corridor at the end of the living room, and invariably a woman is cooking, and she was cut off from the family activities. And she really made that change, and being a thinker and concerned about all these social and modernity related issues, she is the first one to bring the kitchen in the living room. And this is the prototype we are seeing first time. Today, that's a norm. And that's an amazing innovation. That is an innovation that has an emancipatory effect on a woman, actually, because she becomes a part of the family. And now, to our generation and our life, not that just the woman is cooking, everybody is cooking, everybody is part of that conversation. So it becomes a norm today that a kitchen is a part of the living room in any apartment as such, And this kind of innovation, I would call it a cultural innovation in that sense. It has a profound impact on a society. And that is a kind of social modernity. This is a profound example of that, in my view, to create that positive societal change, by taking the kitchen, which was at the end of corridor, because always the man was designing it, and here was a woman who was concerned about all these conditions and who created this possibility. And today it became almost international standard, Right. So that is the beautiful example I can think about. Yeah.
What do I think is interesting about using Charlotte Perrier as an example is about also changing the narrative, because up until a couple of years ago, she didn't appear much in literature and even in discussions, and every credit for the work she did went to Le Corbusier.
Yeah.
Even the famous lounge chair, which
correct.
is credited to him, was designed by her.
Yeah.
So in that sense, giving credit where credit is due for Charlotte Perrier in this instance, but also changing narratives about the position of the kitchen, and connected to that, the position of the woman in society or woman in the household. How important is that change of narrative for you?
I think that's primary. That's very, very primary, because, we are, as a human being, are a social being, and everything around us, our ideas, our notions, are cultivated and defined by narratives. And so far, we always had a singular one type of narrative, and that never been challenged almost all over the world, And because those narratives were never challenged, nobody even asks a question. Those become almost like things written in a stone. And those define the good, bad, ugly ideas in a people's mind. And that's why what we spoke earlier about pigeonholing, a result of that singular narrative.
Right.
And I cannot emphasize more the importance of having multiple narratives all the time.
Yeah, and because singular narratives are easy. They're easy to communicate. They're easy to teach as well.
Yeah.
If you have multiple plural narratives, what exactly do you teach? Because that's very difficult. That's very difficult to interpret, because for every argument there is a counter argument, and that's difficult to communicate.
I don't agree that things are easier to teach if they are single narrative. I think they're boring, and they are limiting, and they're extremely inaccurate, and they limit the imagination and possibilities. They have so many negative things just for the comfort of so-called teaching. I would not call even that a teaching. I think that one need to discover. I think that is the right way of education, rather than saying teaching, here is one narrative and just learn that one. I think we need to discover multiple narratives and even create new ones. So I would not agree with you to say that that's easier to teach. I think that will not be the right way to teach.
What is the core of teaching in your perception?
I don't believe in teaching in that sense. I think true education is a discovery, self-discovery. And I think as a person of experience, one could facilitate that discovery or give a guidance or give a approach, but I would not call teaching. Teaching for me is very much top-down, is to say I know right and that's what. I had that trouble when I was in a school as well, to accept that one point of view.
But you've been asked to teach, you've been asked to head a course as well. What is your perception? What did you actually put in practice when you were responsible for teaching people?
I think to provoke thinking, provoke ideas. I think that's the primary thing, actually. I think that is, and to discover as a person who learns, who discovers things by own means, actually. So it is not, I find teaching a kind of word limiting in that sense,
right.
you know? Yeah.
So education is about providing the context in order for students to discover.
Absolutely.
Right.
And to learn yourself, you know?
Yeah. And to question yourself, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Design and justice. The design justice is a very important theme as well. But before we dive into that, why should we create and why design? Because you've been explaining that creation is connected to human beings. But why is it important to do that, and why do we need to design creations as well?
I think design, I mean, one need to ask a primary question, because it is, I never saw design as a practice in a sense of somebody asking you to walk from A to B and you're just doing that. That's never been my objective as a design practice. You ask a primary question. If one can't idealize what one does, why do it? That's what my primary concern has always been, you know, and that's very, very primal and very essential for the practice. Otherwise, you can't go anywhere. It is very limiting, actually. You're always then dancing on somebody else's tune, you know.
But I can imagine what you're saying. And in connection to what we mentioned earlier as well, how do you make sure you question yourself enough?
Well, that's a continuous practice. That is all-time practice. That's why you engage with the world. That's why all the people who are involved in the book as well, that has been a conversation all my life, you know. So that is really continuous dialogue again and again.
Are they critical enough for you, the people that are being included in the book?
They're extremely critical. They're very highly respected people. They're very senior people. They have a body of work behind them of their entire life, actually. So
but that doesn't mean they're critical to your work.
That is, you need to find. I would love to get that feedback from anybody, and have all the people who read the book, actually. That's very good and important question. And that was very, let's say, primary necessity we had, that we need to do that. Otherwise, it becomes just a commentary, which is useless after one reading, yeah.
Great. You mentioned that design is a cultural act about justice as much as utility and beauty. What do you mean by that?
This goes back to the idea that design, in that sense of making and creating, is definitely act of justice, because it does create and gives a possibility, you know. Before I talk about that, I would talk about something else. I would talk about a lack of democracy of imagination, actually. That is the word, I know. Democracy here, again, I'm not talking about political electoral machine here. No, I'm talking about democracy in a sense of social fraternity, in sense of having respect for everybody, in a sense, you know. And if you talk in terms of democracy of imagination, means if you look at, if to create anything for that matter, you need imagination, and that imagination has not been democratic in any society around the world.
Can you make that more
What does
concrete?
that mean is the profession I come in, and many people design and architecture, unfortunately, up until today, is an elitist profession. You know, it is not democratic enough. It is not plural enough. It doesn't have the diversity of a society we are in, you know. And if you look at our educational institutes, you know, it doesn't show that cross-section at all.
And playing devil's advocate again, because you need to be specialized, you need to have certain knowledge in order to design.
Absolutely.
So that's the reason why it's not democratic.
No, I don't think, I'm not talking democracy in that sense. I think having a representation of the entire society in it.
Again, devil's advocate. Well, people are not really interested.
This is not true. This is not true. I know examples, they've not been given a possibilities. Even here in Netherlands, I would say. Allow me to say that.
Yeah.
And I have examples of them.
Give me the example.
You know, examples of I know examples who gone through my studio. People had immigrant parents and not having knowledge and information and all that, and the misleading, not taking right decision on possibilities one could have, though you have an innate talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very interesting because one of the columnists of the Volkskrant, Sander Schimmelpenninck, actually writes about that, where you see that at Rotterdam University, 40% of the students have a migrant background, but still, if you see where people are being employed after their graduation, that is not being represented, and it's about that informal network of people, of connections, that is not there.
Absolutely.
And that limits them as well.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
That's one of the things, and there are many more multiple reasons for that as well, you know. Yeah.
What are other reasons?
Multiple. I mean, I can't get into all of them, but there are multiple reasons of even making choices, being aware the insecurities one brings it as an immigrant, and so on and so forth. Many more. You know.
Can just design bring about a more just society?
Definitely,
How?
definitely. I would give an example which you see. I will give an example of New York when they built highways and passages, where you go out of New York City. They created a level by which just the car could pass, not the public transport. So automatically, the people who take a public transport, they're excluded.
Yeah.
Without giving anything, and that is injustice.
Yeah.
Now, this is, let's say, the extreme example one could talk about, and there are many more. And one of the architecture example I would give, that in a public building, especially in places like in India, the common folks are not, even they don't have a courage to get in because it creates this imposing effect. That has also been the narrative here. If you see the kind of language we got, either it's a public library or it's a museum that you have to climb the step to get there. Not the modern museums we have here, but many other places. That has not the language that, hey, you are welcome too. So there are many of this, one could go on and on about this thing, which are unjust design solutions. And if there would be possibilities of, let's say, creators and people who are coming from all walks of life, they will have a different take on it.
You brought an example of just design as well. Design justice.
Yes, yeah.
Can you share that?
Well, I was invited to design a very important a project which took a lot of time of mine, and it was a social justice center, a national social justice center on a intellectual who is very well known for a champion of social justice is there. So maybe one could see, and the idea there is really how one could bring just the ordinary folks, everybody in a society which is extremely diverse and extremely vertical, to give a confidence to ordinary folks that they can still be part of that narrative and still they have accessibility to that. Maybe, Jonathan, you can bring those slides actually of the architecture project here. And is it, no, you have to go back, I think. Back.
We're frantically looking for the right.
I think further.
It's about the building, right? Where the building.
Yeah, the building, which is no. You have to go further, I think.
Yeah, the building we can see like in the middle as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you come in the middle of the building and you have access to all the facilities. Actually, you have to go further, probably. You have to see.
Basically, looking for the right images now. But it's about designing a building, and from the outside.
Here's the place. Yeah, you come right away. There is no hierarchies. There is no nothing. You come inside, and you are at the middle of the rotunda, and you have access to public library. You have the introspective center. You have a public theater. You have the whole access to it. So you are not controlled by, or nobody is asked you to do what, or are you allowed to come or not. You can sit, you can walk, you can do whatever you want. So all walks of people should be able to come. That is one of the example, one of the expression one could say of the justice, because it is indeed a social justice center. Yeah.
Right. And we also saw a project that you worked on as well, the turquoise boxes.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's a recent project. We are working with a great agency, and that is the project for a cold chain, we call it, for the vaccination. This project actually has a longer history. When I was heading the master program at the Design Academy, I initiated a research called cold chain, how the vaccinations are transported in different parts of the world, in different geographies. That's the cold chain you see here, how the things are transported from, let's say, the United Nations headquarters to the final end user on the donkey or on the hand and so forth. And fast forward to last year, when we were locked down in the middle of pandemic, we had vaccination looked like the only solution, and we put in our efforts to create a modular vaccine carrier.
Yeah, because one of the problems of the vaccines is they have to be kept at a certain temperature. Very cool.
Very cool. Yeah. And there are different kind of vaccines, and there are we have the current vaccine is one necessity, but we need vaccines for all the children which have to be vaccinated, polio, whatnot, all kind of vaccinations, and they need to be transported in a certain manner. But at the end, they have to be carried by the people. And I'm not a great fan, if we could go next slides, of people carrying carrying it on a shoulder, on a head, but that's the reality of our life.
Yeah, that's the image we see now, because that's the reality that we see, that people carry heavy things on
the head, which is not ergonomic, and that's not cool. People romanticize that, but that's just not correct. But we have to give that as a possibility as well, because you could not only keep the vaccination properly, but thanks to the modularity, they lock all the boxes in a right way. They are very compact, but at the same time, one could carry them individually as well with the straps, or putting it on the head, or carrying it on the donkey or on a bicycle, or whatever means you have. Yeah. But there are other features which are very relevant today, which are not in a conventional vaccine carrier, is you can track them remotely. You can control if somebody breaks the cold chain, and you can also control that the right amount of vaccine goes to the right location. Right. So all these things we are in the middle of working right now, actually, and would like to see that become real, actually.
What I think is a beautiful design. It's very urgent, it's very important, but how do you deal with the fundamental question of the West not sharing vaccines with the rest of the world, the West keeping that to themselves, because that's such a fundamental problem that we have to deal with in order to get this started?
I think that's a very, very primary question, and that's the very, very primary question of the haves and have-nots and whatnot. Actually, one of the argument I've been talking with the bureaucrat in our government is, I say, even if you are the most selfish, then still you should do it, because this is a condition. It is in our own interest to vaccinate everybody on a planet.
Absolutely.
If you don't, it will come back. It has already boomeranged once. It can come back again. So my argument was, like, even if we are the most selfish, 100% selfish, it's no charity, it's no kind of altruism, nothing, no kind of trying to help somebody. No, you have to help yourself. Even if you have that perspective, you must do that. Yeah. So the question is, okay, our government has given some bunch of money at the beginning of last year to World Health Organization, but I think what we really need is to give a properly worked out solution which can become an exemplary possibility, and that hopefully can become a norm that can be used for a long time, actually. And we are working hard. I mean, it's a difficult question. It's not easy one, but that puts a finger on exactly the bigger issue. And the bigger issue is actually about cohesion, which comes back again and again, because the issue is eventually, it's not really about nation.
No, it's about social cohesion, and that's very important. And that's interesting, because in the book, you state you go beyond inclusivity and diversity, because that's a very important theme in society now. But you go beyond that, and you talk about the concept of social cohesion, and you've been working on that for a very long time. And that shows in various projects. Can you elaborate on that social cohesion and what you exactly mean by social cohesion?
Yeah, first thing I must say, social here does not mean by any means a charity. Social really means a condition for creating that kind of a cohesion. I think the issue we've been finally talking about, which should have been spoken about a century ago, is the inclusion and diversity, which is another way is a tokenism in a way.
Tokenism?
Yes, it is. I mean, it is in a way, I excluded you, I include you, and then I done my job.
What they say is that diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusivity is being invited to dance at that same party.
Yes, but on whose tune you want to dance? That's the important question. I want to have multiple tunes to dance, on that party. I want to have multiple possibility of a cuisine which can come from all walks of life and point of views to eat in that party. If you give me one prescribed menu already predefined and you just invite me as a token, I've been in that position as well, I must say that.
How did you deal with that?
I know you understand that, but you understand and you understand the fact that that is not the solution, neither to say feel cool about it. You just say that is a reality and we need to speak about it.
And did you stay or did you leave?
No, I speak about it because this is exactly what happened. It is happen in a multiple scenarios where it is not about staying and living. It is, I think, creating a meaningful dialogue that you can talk about the issue.
But what happens if you do address it? What happens?
It do addresses the sensible people always appreciate that the point is on the board. Whether it is noted and something happens or not, one can't take a responsibility for that. But at least one could bring a conversation to the table. And that is important. But again, when I'm talking about social cohesion, it's not a reaction to that or none of that. I am happy that these things are finally happening and we are talking, even if it is tokenism, because that was even not the case. So at least it's happening. So that's not a bad thing. But that's not the end of everything. That's not even the beginning, in my view.
It's not even the beginning.
Yes, because really, if you have a multiple possibilities, that's where the question you raise about having multiple narratives becomes, at least then it's a beginning. Just being invited is not the beginning. I'm sorry, I can't say that. That's very limiting. But the cohesion idea is much more beyond that. It is not a reactionary. It is not talking about that. In a true sense, I think in any kind of condition, I think a lasting impact, or in a true sense, bringing a common good for a longer duration of time, for a bigger, let's say, number of people, is only one possibility: is a cohesion. And
why?
Because you genuinely respect, you're not there because of a token, you're not there as a representation, but you're genuinely contributing and your ideas are taken on the board.
And how is that connected to cohesion?
Because that will lead to cohesion. Because once your ideas are taken on a board, that would definitely lead to a cohesion. Because it is not then just a representation.
But then again, it's not always possible to include everybody.
No, I would not agree with that. It's not only possible. If you just tell me that there's only one point of view and you must stick to that.
No. Maybe there are three. Maybe there are 100 point of views on a certain topic, on a certain project. Within the practice of the project, for example, it's not possible to bring in those 100 perspectives. You have to make how do you make a choice? How do you make a selection?
But I think it's not about 100. I think it's about, even if you bring sensible 3 contributions, that will make a change.
But still, people will feel left out. And how do you deal with that?
I think the question of left out, the question is, again, that's a question of how you deal with the situation, being left out or not. I mean, these are all different parameters and different conditions. But I'm going back to the possibility of taking a plurality into question, having a plurality on a board, actually, in every context.
I understand, but sorry, that's a difficult word to pronounce. Plurality is, compared to now, is a step forward. But when plurality is the norm, it provides the new problem where you have to deal with representation.
Well, we do have means and possibilities and technologies to engage that and create that, actually, or cluster those opinions and possibilities.
Yeah.
But I think we can't talk about those problematic which are not there yet. And when we'll get there, we'll solve them. But we don't even have those possibilities right now. We have to just admit that, you know.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on various projects where that social cohesion is important?
I think that's a very important thing. I think social cohesion, one aspect I mentioned you definitely is the project about the social justice. But there's another project I would talk here is a recent public sitting project where, you know, we are the generation or the society right now. Everybody's stuck with their mobile device, and even if you go to public space, you know, and we hardly have a encounter, especially younger generation, you're just stuck up with your phone actually, you know. So here is a possibility, thanks to the public sitting is not just one seat, but two possibilities that two unknown people can sit together and create a kind of cohesion that you can create unexpected encounter. You know, that is another step towards which was automatically happening a generation ago. Right now it doesn't happen. So that is again a kind of a conscious way to one could deal it. But it's a playful solution, but very industrial and very, very efficient solution of creating something which will define the public space in a much more, let's say, playful and poetic manner actually. You know? And I hope that gets very clear from this project, that it brings people unexpectedly together.
Right.
You know?
And the project itself is flexible in itself. There's no one way of using it.
Exactly.
There's different ways of putting that into practice or putting that into a space.
Definitely.
Right. That's a question from the audience I would like to ask you. The question goes, which thought, which object, which circumstance will help us to better, to a better life, a culture of creation, and make others live that culture too?
Well, there's no prescription, you know. There's no prescription of which you, by doing this is going to happen. You know, I think everybody ought to ask that question, and that would be a different answer for each person actually. But if you are consciously asked that question, probably you will not consume mindlessly. You know? And
there are other things that about the circumstance. It's about including new narratives. It's about democratizing. It's about social cohesion as well. And if it deals with the objects, we just now see an object here that can contribute to that more just or more connected society as well.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
Right. We're moving into the final stages of the conversation. Time just flew by here. If I would invite you here again in 10 years, which path, I would like to ask to take your glass orb out of your case and tell us where we will be. Are we going forward? Is everything that you described here, have we already taken steps in the right direction, or did we end up in the same situation where we are in now?
Well, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't
exactly.
tell you
That's exactly what still.
So, and I don't believe in fortune tellers at all. So, I would say, I think there are many, many narratives and many, many possibilities. And I hope, I mean, at least on an optimistic note, that we do get a possibility to practice multiple narratives at the same time. And I would not subscribe to the idea saying that we, oh, that's too complex, or that's this, or that's that. You know, we have enough possibilities, and human being is smart enough to appreciate and understand different narratives. You know, so we do need multiple narratives, and we need all the time, actually.
But will that be made room? Because the reason I do ask this as well is that Philip Blom, who's a philosopher who was one of our guests here as well, said, well, from now on we can expect to move from disaster to disaster almost.
I think that would be, I think that could happen, but that would be very pessimistic view in my view. I think it can happen.
Sense, because we saw that what the pandemic did to society, it made things possible. Something as a basic income was not possible, and Holland did provide it in another way. You know, they provided money in order for people to survive. So the positive part of moving from disaster to disaster is that everything becomes fluid, and we have to redefine society again.
Okay, you're talking in that sense of disaster. Of course, those disasters help to define, because you asked primary question. That's definitely true. But I think the question I'm talking is not the disaster. Of course, there could be many more disaster, environmental disaster, whatnot. You know, there could be also disaster of human dignity. That's a problem. That's a problem at stake. It's all around the places. You know, so all these things can happen. But I think hopefully hopefully, and that is my optimism, that what could lead from this disaster is a possibilities which were not thought through before. And hopefully those will give us better possibilities in a society, and so far we did have that. If you take a bigger historic perspective, we know that not so long time ago, half of the population was not allowed to vote. That's the woman was not allowed to vote. That's not the norm anymore, and there are many more conditions like that. Yeah. So I do see with my optimism that those positive changes will happen. And if they don't, we have to claim them.
Right. I totally agree with that, and hopefully we are not moving from disaster to disaster, and is that not the only thing that we need in order to change society? Thank you so much for your conversation. Thank you. The book, Culture of Creation, is available. People here can buy it actually right on the corner. If not, you can find it online to buy it. So thank you a lot. I hope to talk to you in future again. This is the end of the program. Like I said, this hour has moved fast. If you're interested in more programs of Pakhuis de Zwijger, please go to the website www.dezwijger.nl. If you would like to know more about Designing Cities for All, you can find information there as well. If you'd like to make a contribution to our programs directly, that is possible. If you go at dezwijger.nl/pay, you can leave a contribution that benefits the programs directly. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.